So I was born in Pakistan and in a Muslim family. And in Islam, there are two main sects. So there's the Shia and the Sunni sect. And I come from the Shia sect. And within that also, there are many denominations. And I come from the most liberal sect of the Shia branch. And I'm one of three sisters. And when I was 4 years old, we moved to Africa.
Ngayon mga kapatid, ating pakinggan kung bakit ang isang Muslim na devoted Muslim na siya'y gusto niyang hangad niya na mas malalim pa ang pagkilala kay Allah, ngunit ito'y nagdala sa kanya sa pagkatuklas sa tunay na iglesia, ang Iglesia Katolika, at malalim na relasyon kay Crsito at sa mahal na Birhen Maria. Pakinggan natin ang salaysay sa dating Muslim na si kapatid na Nikki Kingsley sa interview ni kapatid na Marcus Crody sa Home Journey. May nag-request kasi sa message sa atin mga kapatid. Pakinggan natin ang kanyang pahayag.
So I was born in Pakistan and in a Muslim family. And in Islam, there are two main sects. And I come from the Shia sect. And within that also, there are many denominations. And I come from the most liberal sect of the Shia branch. And I'm one of three sisters. And when I was 4 years old, we moved to Africa. And that's where I grew up. I did all my schooling there from, kindergarten all the way to high school, and attended the American school, the international schools there. And life was wonderful. It was simple in Africa. We had lots
predominantly Muslim area?
No, not necessarily. We lived in different parts. We lived in Tanzania, and so there were a lot of Christians there. But we were raised in a very sheltered home. Our parents, very kind, very loving, taught us to be, loving, kind to everybody. It was more. So I was born in Pakistan and in a Muslim family. And in Islam, there are two main sects. So there's the Shia and the Sunni sect. And I come from the most.
Ito ang salaysay niya mga kapatid nang hinanap niya umano ang mga aral na makapag palalim sa kaniyang pag-unawa kay Allah at kay Muhammad. Ngunit, bakit po ba ito'y nagdala sa kaniya upang matuklasan ang tunay na iglesia? Samahan ninyo kami. Kumusta sa lahat nating mga kapatid na sumusubaybay sa ating live streaming? Muli itong inyong lingkod, Brother Wendell Talibong. At sa pagkakataong ito mga kapatid, ating may request kasi sa mga nagmi-message na kung maaari iparinig umano natin ang napakagandang conversion story sa isang Muslim na bakit po ba nagiging mala-impyerno ang kanyang buhay nang siya'y nag-asawa at upang maligtas lalo na ang kanyang mga anak, nilaliman niya ang kanyang relasyon sa Diyos. Gusto niyang matuklasan ang malalim na relasyon kay Allah. Pero ito'y hindi niya alam na maghatid sa kanya sa Iglesia Katolika at sa relasyon ng ating Panginoon Kristo at sa mahal na Birhen Maria. Muli, ating pakinggan yung interview ni kapatid na Marcos Crony sa Journey Home kay Nikki Kingsley na isang former Muslim.
So I was born in Pakistan and in a Muslim family. And in Islam, there are two main sects. So there's the Shia and the Sunni sect. And I come from the most liberal sect of the Shia branch. And when I was 16, my parents arranged my marriage. And he was Sunni and I was Shia. And that's when I got my first culture shock. I had been worshiping Allah and begging Him for 15 years to save me. Of course, the Quran, which I was reading, the life of Muhammad, or poetry, but nothing to help me grow in spirituality. You know, you have to remember, I'm in my Muslim mindset, and to me, this is very scary. And then I got angry. I got angry with God because I thought, Allah, I have been praying for all this time, prostrate hours, praying to you, asking to reveal yourself to me, draw me closer to you. And now you send me Jesus and Mary. Why didn't you send me Muhammad?
Yun, mga kapatid, no? Kung tunay talaga ang relihiyong Islam, nang kanyang hiningi na parang mas mapalalim pa ang kanyang relasyon, bakit umano dinala siya upang matuklasan ang tamang relihiyon, ang simbahang Katoliko, ang relasyon sa mahal na Birhen Maria, at lalo na sa ating Panginoon Crsito na hindi basta-basta, no? Na ang aral ng simbahang Katoliko kumpara sa mga Muslim na tatag ni Muhammad, ang kanilang aral, si Kristo'y tao lamang at hindi Diyos, mga kapatid, no? At sa kwentong ito, isinalaysay nila na sila mga Muslim ay maliligtas, yung mga Kristiyano hindi maliligtas. Nauna nating tinalakayan, di po ba? Na ayon sa kanilang ostads na si Ryan, kahit pa terorista ka, kahit pa maraming napatay mo, maimpyerno ka man, maliligtas ka rin. Muli natin pakinggan muna si Ryan Kando sa Islam.
So, paano yung mga Muslim na mamatay tao, mga terorista? Ligtas din ba sila? Kung ang pinag-uusapan dito ang pagpasok sa paraiso, lahat ng Muslim makakapasok sa paraiso. Ano man ang nagawa niyang kasalanan sa mundong ito. Ang mga Muslim na pumapatay ng tao na walang hustisya, ang mga Muslim na sinasabi ninyong terorista, ang mga Muslim na gumagawa ng kasamaan, umiinom ng alak, naninigarilyo, nambababae, lahat ng kalokohan, kanyang ginagawa. Siya ay dadaan muna sa impyerno para pagdusahan niya ang lahat ng kanyang nagawang kasalanan na hindi niya naihingi ng tawad. Pagdudusahan niya yon sa impyerno. At pagkatapos niyang pagdusahan yon, ay pupunta na siya sa paraiso.
See? Narinig niyo itong napaka-weirdong doktrina nila na napaka-peligro talaga. Dahil ay pwede pa lang kahit gaano ka kasama, kahit ano pang gawin mo, pupunta ka man sa impyerno, ay may paraiso pa rin na matanggap mo. At di lang yan, ang kanilang doktrina, no, kabaliktaran. Kung ikaw naman ay hindi Muslim, kahit pang ano umano na kabutihang ginawa mo, ayon sa kanila, yon ay impyerno ka talaga.
Ang mga hindi Muslim, kahit sila ay mabuti, parurusahan sila sa impyerno ng apoy. Bakit? Dahil hindi nila pinaniwalaan na nag-iisa lamang ang Allah. Dahil sila ay nagtambal sa Allah. Sila ay sumamba sa ibang Diyos maliban sa Allah. Kaya yun po yung pinagkaiba natin, mga mahal naming kababayan.
Yun ang manong pagkakaiba, mga kapatid. Kaya paano ngayon na yung mga Muslim na sumasamba kay Muhammad, sumasamba sa puno na nauna nating pinarinig ninyo yung pahayag ni Ustad Ibrahim Romas. So, di basta-basta sa Islam na yayakap sa pananampalatayang Kristiyano, lalo na sa simbahang Katoliko, mga kapatid. Dahil palagi nilang tinutuligsa, lalo na sa mga balik Islam, na tayo'y sumasamba ng Diyos-Diyosan o mano. Hindi nila napansin na sila'y nakapila din at sumasamba sa itim na bato. Doon sa Mika. Okay. Balikan muna natin itong pahayag, ang conversion story ni Nicky Kingsley na isang dating Muslim, kung bakit niyakap niya ang simbahang Katoliko, niyakap niya ang pananampalatayang Kristiyano, at niyakap niya ang incarnation, ang mahal na Birhen Maria, ang Panginoong Hesukristo. Sa interview ni kapatid na Marcos Crode sa Journey Home.
So I was born in Pakistan and in a Muslim family. And in Islam, there are two main sects. So there's the Shia and the Sunni sect. And I come from...
Yun ang nagiging division. Pero nauna natin tinalakay na yung bansa ni Muhammad ay isa ang pupunta sa paraiso at yung iba ay sa impyerno umano. Tuloy natin.
From the Shia sect. And within that also there are many denominations. And I come from the most liberal...
So, meron pang maraming denominasyon. No? At meron pang denominasyon o sekta na mula sa Islam, kaya hindi totoo na sila'y nagkaisa, na maliban kay Muhammad, naniniwala na meron pang ibang propeta. No? Okay, tuloy natin.
Sect of the Shia branch. And I'm one of three sisters. And when I was 4 years old, we moved to Africa. And that's where I grew up. I did all my schooling there from, kindergarten all the way to high school, and attended the American school, the international schools there. And life was wonderful. It was simple in Africa.
So, kahit nasa ibang grupo sila sa Islam, siya mga kapatid, napaka-religious din ng kanyang mga magulang. Nagbasa at sumusunod sa mga ritual ng Muslim. Nagbasa sa Quran.
We had lots
predominantly Muslim area?
No, not necessarily. We lived in different parts. We lived in Tanzania, and so there were a lot of Christians there. But we were raised in a very sheltered home. Our parents, very kind, very loving, taught us to be, loving, kind to everybody. It was more about being a good person than really practicing the prayers and the rituals of Islam. So my sisters...
Did you have a belief in God?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we knew we were Muslim.
Okay.
And we knew that that's what we were born, that's what we're going to die, that's the way to be. But my parents didn't really focus so much on doing the prayers and reading the...
Okay, acknowledge din natin ang message ni Ibrahim Greg Irene. Hindi po sumasamba ang Muslim kay Muhammad. Paano natin kukontrahin? Paano nyo kukontrahin yung pahayag mismo ni Ustaz Ibrahim Romas? Di ba ba? Ustaz ninyo yan. Anong sabi ni Ustaz Ibrahim Romas? Honest lang umano siya. Honest siya nang sinabi niya na sinasamba si Muhammad. Nauna natin yang tinalakay. May mga Muslim na sumasamba, may mga Muslim umano na sumasamba din, pati na sa libingan. Pati na sa balete. Si Muhammad, si Ustaz Ibrahim Romas mismo ang nagpahayag niyan. At nauna nating nireplyan ang pahayag mismo ni Ustaz Ibrahim Romas na isang balik Islam. Kaya nagkontrahan sila ni Ryan Kando dahil sabi ni Ryan Kando, sino ba na mangangaral ng Muslim na nagsasabing sinasamba si Muhammad? So, meron ng kontrahan sila, no? Dahil Yun ang pahayag ni Akando at iba naman ang pahayag ni Ustad Ibrahim Romas dahil alam natin wala kasi silang doktrina na tinatawag na magisteryo, mga kapatid. Kaya yon ang dahilan na paiba-iba. Okay, tuloy natin ang pahayag.
Quran, it was more about being kind to everybody, loving everybody, but knowing we're Muslim. And also the culture of Islam is a lot of respect for your parents. And your parents are always right. You honor them, respect them. And my sisters and I were raised that way. So whatever my parents said is whatever was right. And so we grew up in that way, practicing Islam in a very open kind of way, not so much as praying the namaz or doing anything like that. And because
dahil nasa ibang branch yan ng Islam, mga kapatid, ngunit siya'y napag-asawa naman sa kabilang sikta naman ng Islam.
life was so simple, we had no telephone, we had no TV, but lots of friends. And so I started reading a lot. I would read a lot of books, and that was really my window into the world. It helped me see the world through the books, and I started with mysteries and graduated to romance novels as I grew up, and that was the world I created in my mind.
Wow.
And it was
I mean, that's fascinating itself to think of creating a world out of those books.
right, because we didn't really see much more. Now, we did travel. We would go to Pakistan every year. We came to America every year also to visit on vacation because we had family. But we were always happy to go back to Africa because that was home and life was just simple and
So sa Africa sila at kahit sila mga Muslim, pero nakatira sila sa lugar na marami ding mga Kristiyano.
we loved it there. And when I was 16, my parents arranged my marriage. And I didn't really object because that's how we were raised.
Yeah.
We were raised not to really think about a career or who we wanted to be, but more of being a good wife.
So pinalaki sila sa obedience ng kanilang parents at kahit na ang kanyang parents ang nag-arrange sa mapangasawa niya, yung imagination niya na ang kanyang magiging asawa ay talagang mamahalin siya. Pero iba pala.
Wife and a good mother, and that was going to be, the mission.
But that didn't sound like that would have rung with your romance novels.
No, but it kind of did because I imagined him to be this knight in shining armor, and I could knit whatever story I wanted, and because of the obedience part too, that's how I was raised. So I didn't really object to it.
Yeah.
When I came, this was when I was a sophomore in high school when my marriage was arranged. Wow. And when I was close to graduating high school is when I started to feel like I want to go to college. I want to explore who I can be. But I was told that that wasn't possible. And,
Because you're not married yet.
No,
Yeah,
no.
that's arranged.
That was going to come up
gotcha.
very soon.
Yeah.
And so when I any amount of crying wasn't going to change that. So, I went back to my romance novels and just, dreamt of this knight in shining armor and what this marriage was going to be. And so we went back to Pakistan and I was married and my parents flew back to Africa. And now I was in Pakistan, the country I was born in but hadn't really lived in. Living with a new family because the culture is that
Yun ang kultura nila, no? So, nakatira siya sa bagong pamilya sa parents ng kanyang asawa.
live with your in-laws, with your husband's parents. And he was Sunni and I was Shia. And that's when I got my
So, yun ang kanilang pagkakaiba, no? Dahil alam natin, halos hindi rin ito magkasundo itong dalawang malaking asekta ni Muhammad.
First culture shock.
I was going to say that a lot of the audience are not going to visualize or feel for the radical difference between those two groups.
Right. Yeah, so the Sunni are more, like the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, and that is all that
More
they focus
fundamentalist
on.
in
More
that area.
fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And like I said, the Shias do too, of course, believe all that. But like I said, I came from a more
different-
liberal kind of branch, and I hadn't really practiced it, even though I believed with all my heart in Islam. And so I went through a culture shock. Now my mother-in-law is praying 5 times a day, and they would look at me like, what kind of a pagan was I, And so I started to learn very quickly, how to pray and, do the ritual cleansing and everything.
No,
That
so, batay sa ritual na ng Sunni, mga kapatid, siya'y sumusunod nito.
is necessary. Unfortunately, my husband was not the knight in shining armor.
Yon ang pahayag niya. Iba sa kanyang nasa isipan na pag mag-asawa na siya nitong Muslim na ito, mamahalin siyang tunay, iba talaga, no? Kaya sabi ni Noor Hana, baboy ka talibong, mangmang ka. Meron pala bang baboy at mangmang ang mga Muslim, no? Okay. So, itong pahayag na ito ang ating ipinarinig sa inyo upang yung mga katulad ni Nikki Kingsley mabuksan ang isipan tungkol sa pananampalatayang Islam dahil, mga kapatid, isang bisis lang tayo dadaan dito sa mundo. At napakapiligro po pag tayo'y umaanib sa maling pananampalataya. Ang pagkadaya ay maranasan sa iba't ibang paraan. Pero mas piligro pag madaya tayo sa pananampalataya na hindi naman totoo. Okay, tuloy natin.
And that dream kind of shattered the day after my marriage. And so I turned to God desperately at that point. And I thought, because in Islam, you serve God. He is the master, and you are this being on earth that you just beg him for mercy, forgiveness, and you worship him. And so I thought my only way out of this was going to be by prayer. If I could get Allah's attention on me, he was going to save.
So, di pwede siyang makipag-divorce. Kaya paulit-ulit siyang nagdasal na iligtas siya ni Allah sa kaniyang sitwasyon.
Me, because divorce was not an option. That would bring shame on my family. That was just not done. And I had 2 younger sisters who would marry them. And so I had to survive this. And I was 18 years old. I had my whole life ahead of me, and I was in a country where it was male-dominated. And so it was a very difficult time. And so I started reading the Quran, and in the Quran there's a chapter dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And when I came across that chapter, it's called Surah Maryam. Maryam is, the name for Mary. I was just so drawn to this beautiful woman who was so holy and so pious. And she's the only woman that has a chapter dedicated to her. And I was just so drawn to her. I fell in love with her. And I would read that chapter every single day. And I was pregnant with my daughter at that time. And I just asked that my child would be as holy as this woman was. And and I, of course...
So, nang nabasa niya yung chapter na sa Quran pa, hindi pa siya Katoliko, pero napalapit na ang kanyang relasyon sa Mahal na Birhen Maria at inaalay niya ang kanyang anak na sana'y magiging banal ito tulad sa mahal na Birhen Maria.
I was begging God to do a miracle and get me out of Pakistan so I could have, some freedom. And so my daughter was born, and shortly after that, Allah heard my prayer, and we moved to the Middle East. We moved to the United Arab Emirates. And so that's where I lived for the next 10 years. My son was born there, and I was practicing Islam. And more so now, the more the Sunni.
Wala talaga siyang balak, mga kapatid, na yayakap sa Kristiyano dahil sa paniniwala ng mga Muslim ayon sa kanya, ang mga Kristiyano umano ay sa impyerno. Okay. Kaya gusto lang niya na laliman ang kanyang relasyon at pag-unawa ni Allah dahil para sa kanya, meron pa siyang hindi nauunawaan.
Way, because that's the family I'd been married into. And unfortunately, things weren't going well in my marriage. It didn't get any better, even though moving to the UAE was better because I had a little bit of freedom. I wasn't living with my in-laws. And so as things got worse with the marriage, and now I have 2 children, I got very depressed and suicidal. It just started to affect my health.
So, dahil sa sitwasyon ng kanyang marriage life, iba kasi nasa Quran, alam nyo ba, na pwedeng saktan yung asawa? Tatalakayin natin yan sa susunod, mga kapatid. Gusto na niya magpakamatay, pero nang tinawagan niya ang kanyang ama, tinulungan siya upang makaalis sa bahay ng kanyang asawa.
And through all this, I had been telling my parents I was unhappy, I didn't want to stay anymore, and they kept telling me, you have to grow up, life is a compromise. They thought I just wasn't mature enough. Well, it got so bad, and I was getting suicidal, so I did tell my dad about that one day over the phone, and that's when they took notice, and they thought, okay, this is serious.
Yeah.
And so my dad decided to help me, and he sent me money to buy a ticket for my kids and myself. And
so, hindi talaga niya ipinaalam ng kaniyang asawa na may nagkatanggap na pera mula sa kaniyang ama. At yung pagbili nila ng ticket para makasakay ng eroplano papunta sa Amerika.
because I told him I wanted to come to America. And I just felt in my heart that that was the one place, if I came to America, I would get freedom. And to me, it was like a city set upon a hill with a light shining on it. If I could just make it there, I'd be okay. And so my dad sent me some money, and I planned to get away from there. I didn't tell my husband I was leaving, with plans of not coming back, because I was afraid he would take the kids from me and I would be trapped and I would never be able to leave. So in a way, it was an escape from there, and I managed. It was stressful. I didn't know until the plane took off if I would really make it, because all he had to do was call the airport that she's leaving with my kids, and they would have stopped me.
Wow.
And it's when I landed.
So yun ang isa sa mga kinatatakutan niya, no? Na pag nasa airport na sila, tatawagan niyan at hindi sila makatuloy sa pagpunta sa ibang bansa.
Ended in New York, that I could finally breathe, because I sat on the whole flight holding both my kids close to me. And I had a daughter, and I didn't want her to have a life.
Go through the same thing.
Yeah, go through the same thing. I wanted her to have an opportunity to live and have an education. So I arrived, I made it to the city, sat up on a hill, and I landed in the United States, and with my 2 children. I had a couple $100 and 2 kids, no work experience. I didn't know how to drive.
Were you very good at English at that point?
Well, I grew up speaking English because American schools and,
So that was a good...
Buti na lang na nakapag-aral siya at marunong siya magsalita ng English, ngunit nahirapan pa rin siya pagdating niya sa Amerika dahil may mga mga bagong termino para sa kanya.
So I
Preparation
could
for
speak
that.
English, but I didn't understand people would talk to me in English, but I didn't know what they were saying because they would make references to different things, and I didn't grow up here, so I wouldn't understand anything.
Especially if you land in New York, right?
Right.
At certain parts of
Yeah.
New York, you can't understand what they're saying anyway.
So it was a challenge, and I came looking for freedom, but when I got the freedom, it was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because I did want freedom, but it was too much. And so that was an adjustment too.
Our guest is Nikki Kingsley. Those of us who lived in the United States our life probably can't even imagine what it would be like to come from not just a foreign country, but
Right.
such a different culture into New York City. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Did you get any help? Quite your family.
well,
you
I
said
had
you had
family
some family here. Yeah,
yes,
okay.
and God bless them. They welcomed me in their home, and my uncle helped me find a job, and he taught me how to drive. And my first job was in sales, and all it required was driving, and I didn't even have a driver's license. So, but I had 2 children, and I had to make it. And and the company that hired me sponsored me, and I went through the whole legal system of getting a visa and everything.
So, buti na lang tinulungan siya sa kumpanya upang makakuha ng visa, mga kapatid, no?
And so I started a new life. I got my first apartment, got my first car, and got the kids in school, and and slowly got on my feet and settled in. And throughout, God had been very important to me. So my prayer life was, as a Muslim, I was very, very devoted to Allah.
So, napaka-devoted talaga niya kay Allah. Ulitin ko, wala siyang balak, wala siyang plano na magiging Kristiyano. Dahil para sa kanila, ang mga Kristiyano ay patungong impyerno. Pero bakit po ba niyakap niya ang simbahang Katoliko? Bakit po ba tuloy lang natin?
And I wanted to do everything to make sure he was pleased.
When you arrived here and you became acclimated, were you able to become involved in the Muslim community because of
Yes.
what had happened in your decision?
Yeah, because now I was in America, the thinking was a little bit different.
Okay.
So, people were more accepting of that. And it took me about 2 years to get a divorce. And, and that's why I've written a book. There's so many details I
Yeah.
couldn't even, start going into. But I finally was able to get a divorce. All my friends were Muslims, which we would call moderate Muslims, assimilated with the culture, peace-loving, all that, but very devout Muslims. We fasted in Ramadan, we prayed 5 times a day, read the Quran, did everything, and made sure my kids had a Quran teacher. I wanted to make sure my children would not go astray, that I came to this country and I didn't want to lose the faith because I believed in it. And so I was doing everything I could. And what happened, Marcus, was I had been worshiping Allah and begging Him for 15 years to save me. And now that I was in America and I was kind of living a free and a normal life, my prayer changed. Instead of just begging Him to save me, I started asking Him who He was. I wanted to know Him. I wasn't satisfied just doing the rituals because I knew deep in my heart there was more. And I knew I didn't have it. I knew there was more, but I didn't have it yet. And I wanted it at all cost. And truth was something that's been very, very important to me, even as a little girl, talking to my parents, or if I hear a conversation and if my parents said something, I'd be like, wait a minute, but that's not exactly true because so-and-so said it this way, and you just, So I would just nitpick about truth. And once I had that figure, then I was like, okay, now this conversation is fully true. So truth was just this driving force in my life about everything. And so when I started seeking God, I was seeking truth. And I knew there was more to Allah, and I didn't have it.
So, gusto niya pang mas malalim ang kanyang relasyon kay Allah. Dahil alam niya na meron pa hindi niya natuklasan tungkol kay Allah. So tuloy natin siya.
So I would pray and I would be prostrate on the prayer mat for a long time, face down, crying out to Allah to reveal himself to me. And I would get an image in my head, and I would see a wall, and I would see darkness, and there would be silence. I got nothing back. I would look online looking for books to grow in my faith, to know, and I couldn't find anything other than the punishment in the grave, of course the Quran, which I was reading, the life of Muhammad, or poetry, but nothing to help me grow.
So, binasa niya yung aral, buhay ni Muhammad, pero hindi nakatulong umano sa kanya mga kapatid.
In spirituality. And so I was frustrated, so I just turned back to the Quran and I would read that and I would just pray and ask Allah for guidance. And I would hear nothing. So
I'm going to interrupt because you're a Muslim. You had some Christian influence because in places where you were, there was some American influence. But then you land in the United States. And a lot of us think we're a Christian nation.
Right.
But you land here.
Right.
And you live for a couple years until you got and I'm wondering, was our nation, were we a good witness to you? Because it sounds like you weren't being lured away from your Muslim faith at all by what you found here.
Well, you know, that was the one thing I've realized. Nobody witnessed to me. Nobody did. And I'd come here on vacation, but it's like in the quest to be so politically correct, we don't say the word of Jesus because we're trying to be understanding for the other. But in the process, we've become mute about the truth. For what drives us. And no, nobody did. But at the same time, all my friends were Muslim. I had not one Christian. I had created my own world within America.
So ang kanyang pagyakap sa simbahang katoliko, hindi ito'y sa pamamagitan ng ibang tao na nag-anyaya sa kanya. Ito'y sa pamamagitan ng kanyang pagsisikap upang mas mapalalim niya ang kanyang pagkilala sa tunay na Diyos.
That was comfortable. And because Islam was such a big part of my life, culture, how we are as a family. And so, I was seeking, but I was hearing nothing. And I would tell my friends, all Muslim friends, when we would get together, and I would bring up these thoughts that, I really want to know there's more to Allah. I want to know Him. And they would look at...
Meron talaga siyang gusto pang malaman tungkol kay Allah. Tandaan natin na ayon sa mga balik Islam, mahirap unawain ang Santissima Trinidad, Holy Trinity, na para sa ilan, ang sabi nila ay parang 3-in-1 coffee. Pero kung mahirap unawain ang Trinity, alam niyo ba, mas mahirap unawain si Allah ng mga Muslim. Bakit? Dahil ang aral nila kay Allah, sa mga Muslim, hindi tao, hindi espiritu, merong kamay, pero merong isang paa. Sino ang nagsabi niyan? Dahil may nag-comment kasi nang tinalakay ko yan, kita ka na ba kay Allah? Hindi, yung mismong Quran scholar ninyo ang nagsabi niyan. Pakinggan natin ang Quran scholar ninyo.
At under this natural authority, ay meron din pong tinatawag.
Pakinggan natin yung Quran scholar mismo. Ang Quran scholar nila mismo, mga kapatid, sandali. Nagsabi na si Allah ay meron umanong mukha, may paa, i-transfer muna natin para sa mga kapatid natin na nagsusuri ng katotohanan. O sige, paano mapaliwanag nila ang pinaniniwalaan nilang Allah na si Allah ay may paa, merong kamay, pero isa lang paa. Ito ang pahayag ng kanilang Quran scholar.
Allah described in the Quran that he has a face. Allah described in the Quran that he has two hands when he addressed Iblis, Satan. And he told him, what prevented you from prostrating to what I have created with my two hands? So this is what Allah described himself. Allah says in Surah Al-Qalam that on the day of judgment, Allah Azza wa Jal would uplift and show his leg. وَيُكْشَفُ عَنْ سَاقٍ وَيُدْعَوْنَ إِلَى السُّجُودِ.
So, di po ba mayroong isang paa si Allah? Di. Mas mahirap yung unawain kaysa Trinity. Dahil hindi tao, hindi espiritu, may mukha, may mga kamay, may isang paa. Okay, tuloy natin. Yung pahayag, dahil gusto niyang maunawaang mabuti ang tungkol kay Allah.
Me like I'm crazy and say, what more do you want? You're praying, you're fasting, what more do you want? And at this point, I'm more religious than my parents are, practicing. And I said, but there's more. I want to know him. What I was seeking was a relationship. I just didn't know that. So anyway, I went into St. Patrick's Cathedral one day, and this was just a...
So Muslim pa siya nito, mga kapatid. Pero sa kaniyang gustong magsuri talaga at gustong mapalalim ang kaniyang pag-unawa kay Allah, siya pumasok sa St. Patrick Cathedral.
TripAdvisor, thing. It wasn't like I was seeking anything more. I had never researched Christianity. I had no interest in...
So, hindi siya nag-research. Tandaan niyo hindi siya nag-research tungkol sa Kristyanidad, lalo na sa simbahang Katoliko. Wala siyang interest na maging Kristiyano.
Anything but Islam. So I was seeking Allah in the Islamic box.
Kaya,
strict boundaries where I...
Gusto niyang makilala si Allah batay sa aral ng mga Muslim, ngunit ang kanyang hangad na mas mapalalim pa ang pagkilala kay Allah, ito'y naghatid sa kanya sa tunay na iglesia, sa simbahang Katoliko, na niyakap niya at lumalalim ang kaniyang relasyon sa mahal na Birhen Maria at sa ating Panginoon Jesucristo. Tuloy natin.
I was going to find my answers. So I walked into St. Patrick's Cathedral just, to look at it like a tourist. And I walked in, and the first thing that hit me, there was a stained glass picture, of Jesus that was kind of suspended. And I saw his face, and it's like his eyes were alive, and they just looked right into me. And it made me very uncomfortable. And so I walked around, and part of me was feeling like I was sinning, because in Islam you don't have idols. I had just stepped into a church, and so I was going through a lot of turmoil within. And now I felt this Jesus was following me. And St. Patrick's Cathedral is magnificent. It was just so...
yun talaga ang mga nasa isipan na nakikita lang ng imahe ng mga santo, yun ay Diyos-Diyosan na. No? Sa hindi pagsusuri ng katotohanan kahit na sa ibang mga sulpot na sikta, mga kapatid. Para sa kanila, Diyos-Diyosan na. No? At dahil humihipo, isa yan sa kanilang batayan, hinihipo ang mga imahen. Kung yun ang batayan na ang paghipo ay pag-Diyos na, hindi po ba humihipo sila sa itim na bato sa Mecca? Okay, tuloy natin.
Beautiful, and I just walked around admiring it, but afraid at the same time, and Jesus following me. And so I walked around, admired everything, and near the exit is the little gift shop. So I stopped there. The kids were with me, And all of a sudden, I heard a woman's voice in my ear, my left ear, the most sweetest voice, and she said, "Come back, come back." And I looked, and there was nobody there. And I'm thinking, okay, this is not happening, so I ignored it. And then again, that whisper, and then I knew it was Mary. And standing in there, I didn't think Maryam, that the word was Mary, it's her. And I had loved her as a Muslim. And so I couldn't just ignore her and walk out. And when the words came, "come back," she told me exactly where. She was calling me to her chapel at the back.
So, yun ang narinig niya na napakagandang busis. No? Bumalik ka. No? Bumalik ka. At ang busis na ito na narinig niya sa loob ng katedral ay naghatid niya patungo sa kapelya, sa chapel ng Mahal na Birhen Maria.
Of St. Patrick's. She was calling me to her chapel. And so I went back because I couldn't ignore her. Yeah, I loved her so much. And so I went into her chapel and I stood there because I wasn't going to kneel. I'm a Muslim.
Yeah.
And I stood and I asked her, "What do you want?" And I heard nothing. But I felt such a peace.
No, so, yun ang kanyang naramdaman. No? Kapayapaan. No? Kahit hindi siya lumuluhod umano dahil Muslim pa siya, narinig niya pasimula yung bumalik ka, no? Come back. Naghatid sa kanya sa chapel ng Mahal na Birhen Maria at tinanong niya, "Ano po bang gusto mo?" Pero wala siyang narinig. Ngunit na ramdaman niya ang kapayapaan umano.
And, you know, I came back there. I was there in New York City for like 3 days. Every day I had to come back
To the chapel.
to the chapel.
So, imagine, Muslim pa siya, ha? Wala siyang balak na magiging Kristiyano, wala siyang balak na pag-aralan ang pananampalatayang Kristiyano, ngunit nang pumasok siya sa St. Patrick Cathedral, may narinig siyang busis na bumulong siya sa kanya, napakagandang tinig ng busis umano, na bumalik ka at naghatid niya sa chapel at sa pasok niya sa kapelya ng Mahal na Birhen Maria. Tinanong niya, "Ano po bang gusto mo?" Wala umanong natanggap niyang sagot, ngunit ang kanyang naramdaman ay grabing kapayapaan.
I felt I could not, I had to go there and just get that peace.
Araw-araw na siya para lang makakuha ng kapayapaan, maramdaman ang kapayapaan, araw-araw siyang pumasok sa chapel.
A lot of viewers may not realize that within Muslim, Jesus is a part of the story,
Yes.
but a different understanding of
Yes.
Jesus.
So Jesus is a prophet, the mother of the Virgin Mary, Maryam.
The son of the
Yes, the son of the Virgin Mary, and he is human, fully human. He had the gift of healing, and he was born, and he died, and he'll come at the end of time. But there is no divinity linked to him at all. He is a prophet with the gift of healing.
Yan ang aral ng mga Muslim, propeta lang, hindi Diyos, no? Propeta lang, pero may kapangyarihan siya sa panggamot.
So seeing the portrait of Jesus and sensing his eyes
Right.
didn't really be a break from a Muslim background.
No,
right?
there's something special about him,
Right.
but it unsettled me.
Yeah.
Because it felt like he was alive, is what got me. And, in Islam, it is a virgin birth. So that is accepted. And, but
You
at
couldn't
this...
get away from Our Lady.
No, but it was her who was more close to me at that. I didn't really feel Jesus, but it was, or the prophet Isa, but it was more Maryam, Mary. And because it was her who called me, I couldn't turn away. And so I did that, went back for the next few days, heard
Yun ang unang milagro na naramdaman niya. No? Ang mahal na Birhen Maria ang nagtawag sa kanya. At hindi pa siya Kristiyano, hindi pa siya Katoliko, pero pag makapasok siya sa chapel ng mahal na Birhen Maria, di talaga niya maintindihan ang naramdamang kapayapaan.
nothing more, nothing else happened. And I just, life went on back to normal. And I just thought, well, Mariam, I loved her. And, it's just a nice experience. And that was it. And life went on. I fasted. Ramadan came and everything. This was in the springtime when I was at St. Patrick. And then it was December. And the first week of December comes around and I was asleep. And, when you're deep asleep and somebody gently kind of shakes you and you're kind of between the sleeping and the waking, that's the kind of, I felt somebody kind of just shook me a little and I kind of was half awake. I could tell the sun was just rising. And Jesus and Mary were at my bedside. And
Yun ang kaniyang panaginip, no? Ang tandaan natin, yung pahayag niya na mas lumalim pa sana ang kaniyang pag-unawa kay Allah, ang kinikilalang Diyos ng mga Muslim. Pero sa paulit-ulit niyang pagdasal, ito'y naghatid sa kanya sa pagtuklas sa Iglesia Katolika at mas malalim na relasyon sa mahal na Birhen Maria at sa ating Panginoon Jesucristo.
Wow.
it was just beyond words. It was like heaven had come into the room. And they prayed with me. And we discussed my whole life from the moment, even before my conception. It's like we had this discussion of what my life was going to be in heaven. And now they were reminding me. And the joy that filled my heart, it's like my spirit was dancing. And my body, I knew, was still...
So, siya mismo, Muslim pa siya mismo ang nakaramdam. Hindi, walang sino mang mga Muslim o ustads ang makapagsinungaling sa kanya mismong naramdaman dahil siya mismo ang nakaramdam niyan.
On the bed, but my spirit was not. And I was dancing, embracing, and we prayed. And as this was happening, a light was being infused into me. And when I woke up that morning, I was no longer the same person. I was changed. And that I knew deep in me. But in my head started this struggle of what that can't be. That must have been a dream, but it was like, I knew it wasn't. I physically had experienced this. And then I felt a presence come over me.
Ito'y simula na sa kanyang dahan-dahan na conversion, mga kapatid. Alam ko na may mga nag-comments na mga kapatid natin sa Islam, Muslim, hindi nila matanggap talagang katotohanan. Hindi nila matanggap na may nakatuklas sa katotohanan, yumakap sa katotohanan mula mismo sa siktang inaniban niya na sa akala niya ay tama at nasa katotohanan. Tuloy natin.
The day after. And it was God. It was holy. I knew that. But in my head, I couldn't fit it in my Muslim box.
That's what was in my mind. I was at least, as they would say, did you have the right file folders in there to put it? And
I had no labeled folders. All I had was Islam, and everything had to go in there. And I didn't know where to put this. And but the presence that came over me was like a bubble, and it was with me all the time. And I had lived in the same house for a few years now, driven down the same road to go to work. I had no idea how many churches were on that road because I was blind. I didn't care. And all I could see after that, I noticed every church and I noticed every cross that was on that street. And I'm looking and thinking, I had no idea. Like, I truly was blind, but now I could see.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd lived on the same street for years now, and I would drive the same way to work, and I had never noticed how many churches were on that street.
So, dami. Sa Amerika, daming mga sulpot na sikta na mga Kristiyano. Tulad din sa Islam na tinatag ni Muhammad, dami din mga sikta. Di ba? Yun din ang sa Amerika. Din niya na pansin na ang dami pala umano na mga sekta ng Kristiyano.
And as I'm driving, my attention would be drawn. I would see the church and I would see the cross. And it's like this light would shine on the cross. And, you know, it's like, how could I have not noticed all these churches? Or if I went into a store and if there was a Bible in the store or anything that was related to Christianity, my attention would be taken. I would notice it. It would be like a light shining on it, and the voice would say, "Look." And I couldn't get away from it. It was constant. And now, you know, you have to remember, I'm in my Muslim mindset, and to me, this is very scary because, you know, I have no desire to be anything but a Muslim. And why is
So, wala talaga siyang plano na magiging Kristiyano. Ang gusto niya, manatiling Muslim sa relihiyong tatag ni Muhammad at manatili sa kanilang doktrina. Dahil ang kanilang paniniwala, ang mga Kristiyano ay sa impyerno.
my attention being taken to these Christian symbols? I didn't want it. So I started to go through a struggle within my mind. And I started to...
Dahil para sa kanila, yung mga Christian symbols, mga Diyos-Diyosan yan. Kaya nag-struggle talaga siya. Walang advisor niya, walang spiritual director niya. Sa kanyang sariling pagsisikap lang yan at may milagrong naramdaman niya, may bumubulong sa kanyang napakagandang busis umano. At naginay pa niya ang Mahal na Birhen Maria at ang Panginoong Jesucristo na hindi niya maunawaan ang naramdaman niya. At ito'y dahan-dahan sa pagyakap niya sa simbahang Katoliko.
have dreams and visions after that. And every dream, every vision, every interior voice, everything was Christian related. It would be Jesus, it would be Mary. And it had nothing to do with Islam.
So, ang kanyang panaginip na nagdala sa kanya ng kapayapaan, patungkol sa Kristiyano, lalo na sa simbahang Katoliko. Hindi patungkol sa Muslim. Kaya may tanong siya.
And it really scared me. And then I got angry. I got angry with God because I thought, Allah, I have been praying for all this time.
So nagalit na siya sa Diyos dahil matagal panahon nagdasal siya na mas magiging malalim pa ang kanyang relasyon at pag-unawa kay Allah, pero ito'y naghatid sa kanya sa pananampalatayang Kristiyano upang makilala ang Mahal na Birhen Maria at ang ating Panginoon Jesucristo.
Prostrate hours praying to you, asking to reveal yourself to me, draw me closer to you. And now you send me Jesus and Mary. Why didn't you send me Muhammad? Because that would make sense to me, that you are answering my prayer. But I knew it was God who was doing that. Like, I didn't question that. I could feel God's presence. But it didn't make sense to me.
Bakit walang kaugnayan si Muhammad umano? No? Bakit ang kanyang naramdaman ay may kaugnayan sa pananampalatayang Katoliko, Kristiyano?
That why I was afraid because I believed Christians were going to go to hell because
So, iyon talaga ang kanilang aral, mga kapatid. Yung mga Kristiyano ay sa impyerno. Narinig na naman yung pahayag ni Karayan Kando. Kahit pa anong mga mabutin yung ginagawa, kung kayo hindi Muslim, sa impyerno talaga kayo. Ngunit yung mga Muslim, kahit pa sila'y kriminal, mamamatay tao, ano pang mga injustice yan ang kanilang ginagawa, sila'y dadaan sa impyerno, ngunit sila'y makapunta pa rin sa paraiso. Yan. napakapiligrong doktrina. Okay. Tuloy natin.
They believed in a Son of God, and God, Allah was the only one. You know, he had no children. He was not begotten. And now I'm seeing this Jesus. And it started to really scare me. And the Jesus that would come to me, and I would feel his presence, and he would show up in a dream, was not a man. There was power that came from him, and there was authority that came from him. He was not like Prophet Isa, that's, as a Muslim, I believe, who had died, and now I'm seeing him in a dream. It was not that. He was alive. I could feel he was alive. And there was an authority that he came with. And I remember in one dream, the love that came out of him was so intense that in my dream I was dying because I could barely take the love. It was all centered on love. And
Grabe talaga, no? Sa pamamagitan ng panaginip, mga kapatid, halos ikamatay niya. Yung di niya maramdaman, di niya maunawaan na kapayapaan, ang pag-ibig ng Panginoong Hesukristo sa kanya.
I couldn't deny that he was more than a person. And
So, yun. Walang nagturo sa kanya. Ang gusto lang niya mapalalim ang kaniyang pag-unawa sa pananampalatayang Islam at kay Allah. Kaya yun ang dahilan na nagbasa siya sa aklat at talambuhay ni Muhammad, ngunit hindi iyan nakatulong umano sa kaniyang spirituality. Pero sa kaniyang pagsisikap, ito'y ang kaniyang paghanap na hangad niya na mas mapalalim ang kaniyang pag-unawa, pag-intindi kay Allah, naghatid sa kaniya sa pagtuklas sa tamang pananampalataya.
that was my struggle as a Muslim. Now, I refuse to research Christianity on the internet because I don't want to feed into what's happening. I was
So, imagine mo na, mga kapatid, hindi ito tulad sa ibang sekta diyan na para yumakap, bigyan ng ilang libong piso, yumakap ka lang sa kanilang pananampalataya. Pero siya, ayaw niya mag-research pa sa Kristiyanidad. Dahil para sa kanya gusto talaga siya na manatili sa Islam lamang. At gusto talaga niya na mas mapalalim ang kaniyang pag-unawa at relasyon sa kinikilala nilang Diyos na si Allah. Pero ito'y naghatid niya sa mas malalim na pag-unawa sa Kristiyanidad, lalo na sa simbahang Katoliko, sa mahal na Birhen Maria, at sa ating Panginoong Jesucristo.
trying to reject it. I didn't want to research it. I didn't want to read the Bible because I was scared if I got into it where it would take me. So I was rejecting everything I could. I'm like, okay, this was going to be between me and God. There was going to be nobody's research, nothing. So I didn't do anything. And this continued with me for 1.5 years.
Wow.
And I was taken down this road where, and when Mary would call me, and I would, she would ask me to go to a certain place that was Christian, of course, and one was like an outdoor shrine. And I parked my car. I was so angry because I'd had enough of these dreams and visions. I wanted these to stop so I could go back to my Muslim world. I was getting exhausted. And I remember getting out of the car, slamming the door shut, and there was a statue of Mary, and I stood in front of her and said, "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this to me?" And I physically
Sa harap mismo ng imahen ng mahal na Birhen Maria, yun ang kaniyang tanong.
felt these hands on me, turning me to the other side.
At alam nyo ba, nang naramdaman niya ang kamay ng mahal na Birhen Maria na upang matingnan yung, sabi niya, kabilang lugar, ang nakita niya
And when
ay
I looked there was the statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
ang imahen ng Sacred Heart of Jesus. Pero hindi pa niya alam, kaya nagtanong si kapatid na Marcos Crode, no? Paano niya nalaman? Muslim siya, na Sacred Heart of Jesus pala yung nakita niya.
And when I looked at him, I couldn't stop looking at him. I thought I was going to melt. All I could feel was love. So when I asked her, what do you want? She turned me to her son.
Oh, so, nang tinanong niya ang imahe ng Mahal na Birhen Maria, yung imahe, mga kapatid, hindi po yun Diyosan, no? Representation lang po yun. Dahil tayo'y tao, hindi tayo espiritu, nangangailangan po tayo ng representation. Yun ang dahilan kung bakit ang Diyos, siya'y espiritu, nag-utos kay Moises na gumawa ng 2 kerubin na gawin sa ginto dahil sa pamamagitan ng 2 kerubin, siya'y makipagkita. Doon siya makipagkita sa kaniyang kay Moises at sa mga piniling tao. Oh, so, dahil ang Diyos ay nakipag-communicate sa atin sa pamamagitan ng ating senses. Okay, nang tinanong niya ang imahen na Mahal na Birhen Maria, dinala siya sa imahen, napansin niya ang imahen ng Sacred Heart of Jesus.
And I started to go to that outdoor shrine every day, and I wouldn't go to her anymore. I was going to the statue of Jesus. I'd spend hours there. And all I would, I was trying to reject him, but I couldn't leave him either. There was this draw to him. And this continued, long story again, and finally...
I'm curious, it isn't just Jesus, it's Jesus with the Sacred Heart.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how you...
No, ayun, nagtanong si kapatid na Marcos Crode, paano niya nalaman? Muslim pa siya.
I didn't know what that meant. Today I can
So,
tell you it was a Sacred Heart.
But at that time,
it was just Jesus pointing to his heart.
Okay.
so yun lang ang kaniyang nalaman. Basta hindi pa niya alam na Sacred Heart pala yun, no? Dahil Muslim pa siya. Basta nakita niya ang Panginoon Jesucristo na nagtuturo sa kaniyang puso.
And like I said, I've had dreams where the love is so intense I could just die. So he's pointing to his heart, and all I could feel was love. And so there was a lady who I knew at work, and she was the only one I started to share what was happening, these dreams and visions. And she just looked at me and said, "Oh my gosh, you are so blessed. You need to come to my church."
So
now she's Christian, this lady at work. No,
okay.
I mean, I didn't know denominations. I could care less. I just knew she was Christian. I was telling her what was happening to me. And she said, "You have to come to my church. You are so blessed." And I said, "I don't want to go to a church. Why would I go to?"
So may nag-invite na niya na pumasok sa simbahan pero hindi pa na alam kung anong relihiyon, no?
A church. I'm trying to get away from this. And so, but it continued so much, and it came where it was December. It was Christmas time. And I had gotten to a point where I wanted an answer from Jesus, and I wanted to be done. And I said, okay, I will go to a church. I didn't tell my friend because I didn't want pressure. I thought I'll go to a church on my own for Christmas, and I am going to ask Jesus, because the church is his home, what he wants from me, and I want to be done with this. And so I went to a Christmas midnight service to a church down the road from my house. To me, a church was a church. I didn't know denomination. And it was a Christian church. And
Di pa niya alam. Di pa sure kung yung pinasukan niya, katoliko ba, no? Basta pumasok siya sa midnight celebration ng Christmas.
And I went in, and there was a service, and pastor did the reading. They passed a tray around with,
So di pa niya alam kung ano na relihiyon, mga kapatid.
little cups, and I participated in everything. And I was waiting.
Nag-participate na umano siya sa celebration ng pinasukan niya.
Because Jesus was going to tell me what he wants from me. That was my deal for coming in the church.
Yon ang kanyang deal pala, no? Bakit pumunta siya sa naturang simbahan?
And it ended, and we processed out with candles, singing. And it was a beautiful service. I could feel the love. It was wonderful. People were welcoming. And I had taken this big step for Jesus. And I came out, And I was so disappointed because he wasn't there. I felt this emptiness in my heart because I knew what his presence would feel like. I just knew. And I walked out thinking, Jesus, you're not even in your own church. Like, that's how it felt. You weren't there. And I came looking for you for an answer. So now where am I going to go? I don't know what to do because I want to end this.
So, tandaan natin, wala siyang nilapitan na spiritual director, sariling sikap ng niya kung bakit yumakap siya sa simbahang katoliko, bakit siya naniniwala sa pananampalataya nito. Pero noong una, gusto niyang manatili sa pagiging Muslim, mas mapalalim ang kanyang pananampalataya at pag-unawa tungkol kay Allah. Ngunit, ang kanyang hangad na yan ay nagdala sa kanya sa tamang pananampalataya sa simbahang katoliko.
You know, I want a closure to this. So I told my friend, I said, you know, I went to a church and there wasn't there. And she asked me where, and I told her, and she said, just please come to my church. And I said, Debbie, what difference does it make what church I go to? A church is a church.
Yung kaibigan niya, meron pang inaniban na religion, so ini-invite naman siya. Kaya, meron naman siyang katanungan sa kanyang isip, ano po bang pagkakaiba?
Church. She said, no, just
Dahil tandaan natin, devoted Muslim ito.
please come to my church. And I was desperate. I said, okay, I'll come to your church, but I'm not doing a service again and spending all this time there. Just take me when no one's there. I'll know if he's really there. And then, so let's not waste time. So one morning, I go with her on a weekday, walk in, nobody's there. I took my first step in. It was a Catholic church. And to me, what's a Catholic church? It's just a church.
Catholic church na.
Church, right? And I took my first step in and I took a breath and I said, he lives here. I can feel him. I felt physically his presence. And I had no idea the difference between the other church and this.
So wala pa siyang ideya tungkol sa protestante. At tandaan natin, nakapasok na siya sa ibang pananampalataya. Devoted pa rin siya na Muslim. Ngunit na nakapasok siya sa simbahang katoliko, naramdaman niya ang presensya ng Diyos.
Church was just a church. And I just sat down. I'm like, okay, I finally found your home. Now you're going to tell me what you want from me. Why are you doing this to me? And from that day, I started going to that Catholic church every day when no one was there. And I would sit in the back pew alone. And I would argue with the crucifix. And I would tell him every day I was there, you're not the Son of God, because there is no Son of God. What do you want from me? Why are you doing?
So, para pang nakapagdebate siya sa crucifix, ha? You are not the Son of God.
This to me?
Dahil, para sa mga Muslim, kung merong anak ang Diyos, dapat meron siyang asawa. Yun ang argumento nila. Pero natandaan niyo ba yung isang Muslim na imam na convert? Kung si Allah makakita kahit walang mata, makakilos kahit walang kamay, imposible naman na hindi siya magkaanak na walang asawa. Okay, tuloy natin.
I would be angry. I would say it all. And when I was done with my angry rant, and then I would tell him about my day. And I would tell him about, what I was going through with the kids. My daughter's a teenager now, my struggles with everything. And I would leave, and I'd show up the next day and do the same thing and tell him, he's not the Son of God. And I did this for months. The day I least cared for was Sunday, because Sunday I couldn't go because they had people in the church. So I couldn't wait for Monday so I could go and be alone with him and do my, angry thing and then spend time with him. And I'd walk out at peace and I'd show up the next day telling him he can't be the Son of God. And so this went on for months, and finally one day God had had enough, I think, of me. And I walked in, sat down, did the same thing, last pew, and that day, I heard the audible voice of God echo.
So, meron na naman siyang narinig, mga kapatid. No? Milagro talaga na nagdala sa kanya ng conversion. Tandaan natin, yung Muslim, siya, walang balak siya na magiging Kristiyano. Una niyang narinig ng pagpasok niya sa St. Patrick Cathedral na kambak. Okay, tuloy natin.
In that church, I heard it with my ears, and he said to me, "Who are you to tell me who I can be and cannot be? If you really want to know the truth, go